What do you think of Hitler?
Not bad, man.
Not? No?
Not bad.
What do you think of Hitler? That's good? In Arabic.
I don't have idea about it, but she is not bad.
What do you think of Hitler?
My mind, he's a hero.
Why?
He's a very strong man.
Okay.
He have a very impressive character.
One thing that always boggles my mind is how you have people who are hardcore pro-Russia, anti-Ukraine, they love Putin, they completely support Putin's war against Ukraine, and they always will say that Ukraine is a Nazi country, and so Russia needs to go into Ukraine to defeat the Nazis and protect the Russian people from the Ukro-Nazis. That's what they call them, Ukro-Nazis. And I agree that Ukraine does indeed have a Nazi problem, but here is the thing that just it flabbergasts me. How that word is a little weird. I'm flabbergasted, right? It just flabbergasts me. And that is that people who are very pro-Russia and they are sympathetic to Russia's war in Ukraine are also extremely pro-Palestine and very, very anti-Israel. Well, hold on. If you support Russia's war against Ukraine because you are against Ukrainian Nazism and the Banderites, as they are called, then you should be also in support of Israel's war against Hamas. Because just like Ukraine, the Palestinians have a Nazi problem. So there are a lot of Ukrainian Nazis. There are a lot of Ukrainians who revere Stepan Bandera, they revere Melnik, they revere all of these ultra-nationalist Ukrainian national heroes. The Palestinians also have a similar culture. They may not be Slavs, but they are indeed Semitic Nazis amongst the Palestinians. If you can believe that, and it's true, they are Palestinian Nazis. And Gaza has a Nazi problem, and this is why, for example, Israeli soldiers will find Nazi literature in the areas that they conquer. When they go into a house, they will find Nazi literature. And I've seen photographs of this. I saw a photograph, for example, of a Nazi book. I saw, for example, I saw an Arab translation of Mein Kampf. A group of Israeli soldiers found this copy of Mein Kampf in Arabic in a house that they took over. And then in another example, I saw a book that Israeli soldiers found in Gaza, and it talked about how the Holocaust was a myth. And this is all in Gaza. And Russian soldiers, I remember back in 2022 when the war began, I remember seeing photographs posted by Russian soldiers of pro-Nazi literature and paraphernalia found amongst the Ukrainians. And Russian soldiers would go into the Ukrainian barracks and they would find the swastikas, for example, and they would post photos of the Nazi paraphernalia owned by the Ukrainians. And people would post these photos up and they would say, look, Ukro-Nazis, look, Ukraine's Nazi problem. You see, they have Nazis in Ukraine. Ukraine has a big Nazi presence, and this is why I support Russia's war against Ukraine, because this evil needs to be destroyed. But if that is your argument, if that is truly what you believe, then you should also believe in the war against Hamas. You should also agree with the war against Hamas, because just like Ukraine, Gaza has a Nazi problem. And let's not forget, Ukraine and the Palestinians are also similar in their historical roots. If you look at national heroes in Ukraine, you find Stepan Bandera, a Nazi collaborator. You find Andrei Melnik, Nazi collaborator. You'll find Roman Shuhavich, Nazi collaborator. All Nazi collaborators. And amongst the Palestinians, you find who? The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who was a Nazi collaborator. So you find this parallel not only in their ideology, but also in their historical roots, in their history of Nazi collaboration. You'll find it in the Palestinian history, and you'll find it in the Ukrainian history. And people will post up videos of Ukrainian Nazis, and they'll say, look, here's a video from the Euromaidan in 2014, and it's amazing that the Euromaidan was 10 years ago. It seems like it was recently, but it was a decade ago, a long time ago, so it's a while back, but it's amazing how fast time flies. But people will post up these videos from the Euromaidan, videos of Nazis, or they'll post up videos of just Ukrainian Nazis, and they'll say, look, here's a Ukrainian Sea Highling, etc., etc. And they'll say, you see, this is why we have to support Russia's war. Okay, fine. But what if I showed you a video of Palestinians expressing their support, or really expressing their love for Adolf Hitler, or expressing Nazi sympathies, Nazi sentiments? Because I can show you videos of this. And in fact, about a week ago, there was a video that got published on YouTube in which a guy asked random Palestinians on the street, what do you think of Hitler? Now, granted, they were Palestinians who said that they didn't like Hitler, but there were a good amount of them who said that they did. There were a good amount of them who said that they admired Adolf Hitler, and they expressed their admiration for Adolf Hitler. And one Palestinian woman, when asked about what she thought about Adolf Hitler, said, well, some people need to be cleansed. And she was talking about the Jews.
You know who Hitler is? Hitler?
Hitler, yes.
Okay. What do you think? Good, bad?
مرات ممكن يكون كويس ولازم في ناس تنباد ومرات ممكن لا انه ليش واحد ينهي حياة بني ادم هو مش من يعني ذنبه انه ينباد ضمن جروب او مجموعة يعني.
So jokingly, I guess he can be good because I guess some people deserve to be, cleansed. Jokingly.
And in one video I saw a group of Palestinians talking about young men saying that they didn't like Adolf Hitler, but then one of them on the side says, oh, I love Hitler, and the guy looks like a school shooter.
So what do you think of Hitler?
شو رأيكم في هتلر؟ طاغية. He's a tyrant.
Okay.
منيح ولا مش منيح؟
أنا بنظري منيح.
مش منيح.
لا, he's not a good person.
Not a good person.
But you'll find Palestinians who admire Adolf Hitler. And there's video of it. There's video of Palestinians expressing their admiration for Adolf Hitler. And what does this show? The Palestinians have a Nazi problem, just like the Ukrainians have a Nazi problem. So all of the Putinists, all the people who admire Putin, I almost said Adolf Hitler, all the people who admire Putin and who express support for Putin's war and who show videos of Ukrainian Nazis to justify their support for the war, now, by their very logic, should be supporting Israel's war against Hamas. Because just like Ukraine, Gaza has a Nazi problem. The Palestinians have a Nazi problem. There you go. Palestinian Nazis, Ukrainian Nazis. And Ukrainian Nazis and Islamic fundamentalists have a history together. A lot of people don't know this, but back in the 1990s, when the Russians were fighting the Chechen Mujahideen, Ukrainian Nazis went down to Chechnya and fought against the Russians in support of the Chechens. So there is a very recent history that the Ukrainians and the Islamists have together. So when we talk about Ukraine having a Nazi problem, we should also keep in mind that this very Nazi problem exists in the Islamic world. But for some strange reason, the RT crowd, because people who support Russia, they all read RT. The RT crowd are very, very pro Palestine, very pro-Iran, but they support Putin's war because Putin is fighting against Nazis. And they'll say, well, Ukraine has a Nazi problem. And they'll call the Ukrainians Ukranazis. But these very people will support Iran, where there is also a very strong admiration for Nazis. There is a strong admiration for Adolf Hitler in Iran. And also, it's also very strange that you find a lot of collaboration between the Turks and the Russians. And there's, I mean, this has caused a huge spat within NATO, but Turkey purchased some Russian military technology, the S-400, I think it's called, and this caused such a spat that the Americans refused to sell fighter jets to the Turks, and now the Turks are developing their own fighter jet. But you have people who are pro-Russia who will get into the Dugin ideology, and they'll say, well, there needs to be an alliance between Russia and Turkey. But in Turkey, there is also a Nazi problem. They have the Grey Wolves in Turkey, which is a neo-Nazi Turkish nationalist cult. And Mein Kampf at one point in time was a huge bestseller in Turkey. So people who are very pro-Russia, they need to be more consistent. If you're truly someone who is sincere, if you are someone of goodwill, you need to be consistent. At least understand, at least realize and admit that yes, there is a Nazi problem amongst the Palestinians. At least come to the realization that there is a Nazi problem in the Islamic world. There's a Nazi problem in Turkey. There's a Nazi problem in Iran. You may be pro-Iran, but if you're going to go against Ukraine because Ukraine has a Nazi problem, then you should also be against Iran. You should also be very wary of Iran because Iran has a Nazi problem, and there's a lot of racism in Iran. And they had this idea of reviving the Persian Empire, and they had this idea of being Aryans. They're very, they're proud to call themselves Aryans. And it's just so cringe when I see these people talk about, oh, the Nazi problem in Ukraine, but then in the same breath, they'll express their utmost support for Hamas and for Gaza. And it's like, well, hold on a second now. You find the very Banderite spirit amongst the Palestinians. Don't fool yourself. It's right there. So it's just so annoying to see this sort of thing. It's very obnoxious. It's very obnoxious. But yes, the Ukrainians have a Nazi problem. Palestinians also have a Nazi problem. And my father is a Palestinian, and my father was also a Palestinian terrorist. And my father will tell you that when he was growing up, he would hear people saying that their only problem with Hitler was that he didn't finish the job. And neo-Nazis on the internet say the same exact thing. People don't realize this. The Palestinians were alt-right before the word alt-right even existed. That stuff was there in the West Bank. Even when my father was growing up, that stuff was there. And there is still an admiration for Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was a Nazi collaborator. There's still this underlying admiration for Adolf Hitler amongst the Palestinians. And that way of thinking ties into their Islamist hatred against the Jews. That it's the very ideology that led to the massacre that took place on October the 7th. And that's why there's a war going on in Gaza. It's like, yeah, there's a Nazi problem in Ukraine. Yes, absolutely. But the Gazan terrorists actually went out of their way to butcher over 1,000 Jews. And you're going to sit there and deny that there's a Nazi problem. Oh, there's no Nazi problem in Gaza. But you're saying this about people who butchered over 1,000 Jews, and you're saying this about a society that actually celebrated such a massacre. But they don't have a Nazi problem. Yeah. Talk about self-delusion. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.